I'm joined now by Chris Boyven and Jerry Urso, two folks that are going to tell us about an upcoming event at the Jacksonville Library. It actually has to do with a really undertold story of a ship captain who was active during the lead up to the Spanish Civil War. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am. He's probably one of the most dynamic people I've ever written an essay about. He was just a master of everything that he ever tried to do. So Captain Floyd. So I'll tell you a story how I came across Captain Floyd. So Marsha Dean Phelps was writing a book about Solly Mitchell's first 100 years. So I was working with Marsha Dean on a portion of the one of the chapters she was writing. So
And Marsha Dean Phelps is a local historian who does a lot
Yes.
on Black history.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
So we were going through looking for Solly Mitchell's great-grandfather, which was Dr. D.W. Gildersleigh, who was also important during the Civil Rights Movement. So we were trying to find his grave. And so when we're going through the cemetery, I come across a tombstone that says, wife of Captain Floyd. And that's all it said. And my interest just peaked. I'm like, who's Captain Floyd? There was nothing anywhere. So, I started digging, and I come across that there was a former slave who, when the United States the colored troops came to Jacksonville, was freed, and he ended up becoming a harbor pilot. And so he was from New Berlin Pilot Town, which a lot of people don't know. A lot of the harbor pilots in the state of Florida were actually African Americans. All the way down to Key West with the Welter brothers. They were also harbor pilots. They knew the terrain, and especially the inlets of the St. Johns River and St. Mary's River. So they were put in these positions of being captains of these harbor pilots. So his father ends up running a steamer. So before a lot of the train tracks were here, right, there was like one leading to Jacksonville during the Civil War. So how did you get materials up and down St. Johns River? By ferries and steamers. So his dad ends up becoming a captain of a ferry, and he's bringing goods and services up along the St. Johns River. So I could just imagine Captain Floyd sitting on his father's lap while he's running these steamers, and they're bringing cargo up and down. So he was inspired. So Captain Floyd, Father John Floyd, was a great inspiration to him. But his son becomes a harbor pilot, and then he during the Spanish-American War, he gets on a boat called the Dauntless, which was first captained by Captain Dynamite Johnny O'Brien. Right?
But let's get a little context for where we are. I don't want to break
Sure.
the flow, but we're talking about the late 1800s, right?
Correct.
And this man from Jacksonville was running these ships. These ships were going to Cuba specifically to arm insurgents there. Is that
Correct.
right? So talk a little bit about how perilous that was and what the job entailed for him in terms of, getting those munitions here and bringing them down to people who are fighting for independence in Cuba.
So there was a lot of support for the Cuban independence in Florida because there was a lot of Cuban Americans living here, and even Horatio Bisbee actually put up some of the money to buy the Dauntless. There was actually a store pretty much right by where the Hyatt Regency is, and there was a Cuban grocer who used his grocery store as a place to bring the munitions in and then take them off. So Captain Floyd actually lived on Bay Street, right on the St. Johns River. So, and Captain O'Brien only did two trips to Cuba. Right?
He was the captain of the Dauntless.
He was the first captain of Dauntless, but whenever they had go through perilous weather, or they came across the harbor patrols, they would put he was the pilot at the time, Captain Floyd, at the helm. So
and why would he swap out? Why would the white captain swap out with Captain Floyd?
it was a compliment. It was a backhanded compliment, but one of the quotes that Captain O'Brien said was that Captain Floyd was cunning, he was intelligent, and a great pilot. And the only thing about him that wasn't white was his skin, right? So that was like this backwood compliment that he was trying to give him, just basically saying that he was, because of his intelligence, he related it to whiteness, right?
And And we should say you're a historian
Correct.
for a local Masonic lodge.
Yes, and a
Um,
Jacksonville historian.
yeah, and a Jacksonville historian. I want to just ask you a little bit about the history of the, kind of black Masonic lodges and white Masonic lodges. There was a split for a long, long time, racially enforced.
Yeah, there was a couple court cases. There was the ancient Egyptian Arabic orders, Noble Mystic Shrine, where the white Shriners took the Egyptian Shriners to court for the right to use the fez and the regalia, the things that make them nobles. And the Masonic, and was I think it's 1898. There's actually legislation that in order to be a Mason in the state of Florida, you had to be white. So they were actually violating the law by even existing. There was a couple court cases on 410 Broad Street. There used to be, when they first built that building, on the top of the building was a Masonic logo, and they had to take it down during the court case.
This is that extraordinary Henry Clutho building.
Yes.
At the corner of, what is it?
410 Broad Street,
Broad and
Church and Ashley.
Yeah.
is that right? Okay, yeah. Right near the courthouse, but it's still a beautiful building. And is that still occupied by the lodge?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
That building has more black history than any building in the state of Florida. There was probably 1,000 members of this organization that were just as significant as Captain Floyd, James Weldon Johnson, the first African American to represent Florida in the United States Congress. You had, the first black doctors. They all belonged to that organization, and you can tie more black history to that building at any place in the state of Florida.
And you are the historian for that lodge?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So, Chris, I want to ask you, this is part of the library's Black History Month observances. Why are we telling this particular man's story? It was a new story to me.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful that we have the opportunity to tell stories like this. And you're right, these are new stories. And even Jerry and I were talking, like, you're not going to come into the library, open up a book, and find these stories there. So we really love the opportunity to share stories like this that are unknown, that are untold with the public. And it's also fortunate because right now we just received the library just received $1 million grant from the Mellon Foundation to enhance its African American history collection. So stories like this, and there will be also related documents that Jerry will be donating, he's talking about donating to the library. Not only will this help enhance Jacksonville's African American history knowledge, but it's going to be we're working on putting into a digital public archive so the whole country, the whole world can finally hear some of these great stories. So we look for these opportunities that really make history come alive, and we're very fortunate to have Jerry to tell these.
So we're talking about the story of Captain James Floyd from Jacksonville. He was a black pilot with a master's license, and he was helping support the insurgent independence effort in Cuba back in the late 1800s. If you have a question, you can sure give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. Jerry, this is interesting, a piece of history, because it really did grow out of your own personal curiosity. Like you said, you were sort of saw this unusual engraving on a
Yes.
headstone, and it just sort of, you followed the trail.
Can I tell you a funny story about Captain Floyd? So when he becomes the captain of the Dauntless, he makes several trips. As a matter of fact, when he passed away, the Cuban government paid for his tombstone. It is a beautiful piece of marble. It's probably 10 feet by 4 feet.
At the same cemetery?
It's at Evergreen Cemetery.
Okay.
He was given full military honors by the Cuban government. They had consulates from Cuba come up here. He was given all kinds of medals. They wrote folk songs about him and Captain O'Brien. So they were out running the harbor patrol, and there was a dense fog on the St. Johns River. So the harbor patrol fired a couple of shots across the bow to get the Dauntless to stop. So in the fog, Captain Floyd loses them, pulls up to his house on Bay Street. They unload a 50-pound cannon and all the munitions, bring it to his house, jumps back on the boat, catches up to the harbor patrol and says, "Where you guys been? I've been looking for you." And then another instance, they were coming back from Cuba and they only had one box of munitions left on the Dauntless. So they fired some shots across the bow, get the Dauntless to stop. So James Floyd, seeing that there's this one box of munitions, decides to stand on top of the box when they board. So they come and the customs house inspects the whole boat. They can't find any munitions. So then the captain of the patrol boat goes to Captain Floyd. He goes, "What's in that box you're standing on?" And Captain Floyd replies, "Your men look really hungry, and this is the last box of sardines we have that we brought back from Cuba. Would you like them?" And they looked at Captain Floyd and said, "No, no, thank you," and left the boat.
This this was the lead up to the Spanish and American War. This was when Cuba was fighting for its
Right.
independence from Spain. And you talk about the harbor pilot trying to stop these boats from going back and forth with arms to Cuba, which is weird because, I mean, eventually the U.S. was at that point sort of in the background supporting Cuban independence.
It was wink, wink, even though President Cleveland had issued an executive order basically stating that America would be neutral. So I think it was the neutrality clause or something of that nature at that time.
And not get between Cuba's effort and Spain.
Correct. There was a lot of animosity with America and Spain anyway. Here in Florida, the whole Amistad story that with Queen Isabella that lasted a long time. So there was this neutrality. But you look at a lot of the Cuban Americans that are living in Florida, they're going to support Cuban independence. So it was a difficult time. Like here in Jacksonville, there was the people that are pro Spain and the people that are pro Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of it was wink, wink, and swept under the rug. And yeah, we know you're doing this, but just don't get caught.
So the harbor pilots were sort of tasked with
Yes.
stopping boats like the Dauntless,
Right.
but perhaps their sympathies were with people like Captain Floyd, who was trying to arm these insurgents in Cuba.
I mean, there was a great support in the African American community for Cuban independence, and a lot of W.E.B. Du Bois's writings. So it was actually Du Bois when I finally found the article in the Crisis magazine that gave me a lot more insight and information to keep on digging the story of Captain Floyd. When I found a letter from Du Bois to Captain Floyd's wife, looking for a picture of him. So when he passed, there was a nice article that Du Bois had wrote.
Okay. Crisis Magazine is the NAACP publication.
Yes, ma'am.
And so that kind of history is something that you're going to be getting into when you do this presentation at the library. I just want to read a little note we got from Nancy in Atlantic Beach. She says she was driving to work and listening to Jerry and says he is a great storyteller and she's mesmerized by the story. So clearly a lot of interest in that. So when is the event and how can people find out more, Chris?
Yeah, the event is this Saturday, February 10th at 2:30 at the main library. It's going to be in the Special Collections Department, which if you haven't had a chance to visit it, it's just absolutely beautiful. So it's 2:30. People can pre-register online if they like. They can go to the library's website, jackspubliclibrary.org, look for the History Chat logo, and they will find how to register. And yeah, we'd love everybody to come. It's a free event for everybody with a library card.
Well, great history, Jerry. Thank you so much. Chris, thanks for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ann.